Hello, and welcome to the Student Ministry Conversations podcast with your hosts, Russell Martin and Brent Aiken. This podcast is all about equipping, encouraging, and inspiring youth pastors weekly with topics that are brought to the table by youth pastors from all over the world. And now, here's our host for this week, Russell Martin.
Well, hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Student Ministry Conversations podcast. My name is Russell Martin, and I'm glad to be back with this. I've taken a little time off, and Brent has had most of your conversations, but I'm glad to be back. We have a great conversation this week. Just a few reminders, real quick housekeeping. Go and check out studentministryconversations.org. Links, transcripts, videos, blog posts, and then also connect with us at Talk Student Men on all of the social network things. But that's enough housekeeping. I want to get straight to the conversation. So we have a great one today. I want to let him introduce himself. I'll let Jon introduce himself. That's all I'll tell you. But we've connected just recently, like earlier this week, I think. And so you can tell from the back, he's a Star Wars fan and has Grover back there too. So interesting background. You can tell us about that. But Jon, why don't you tell us who you are and what you do?
Yeah, my name is Jon Batch. I'm glad to be on with you, really, Russell. It's an exciting opportunity to connect. I originally started youth ministry in 1990 in the great state of Michigan. Go Blue. They will be the national champions, and that can't be edited out. I hope. I pray to the Lord that happens. And in about 90, and I did volunteer ministry. My first ever event as a volunteer was an all-nighter in 1990, and I'm still doing youth ministry in 2022. So as we record this, which is crazy, in about 97 to 99, I had some part-time gigs. 99, I got a full-time job, to which in a year I got fired, which was very interesting. Around Christmas time, Michigan automotive wasn't good. So we took a time off, and kind of my wife and I, and then two children, explored what God wanted us to do. And he eventually said, get back in the game of volunteering. So I volunteered with a guy in a church, and then was told by him to go to youth specialties, put my resume out there. And then in 2023, we were driving homeless to the state of Indiana, to a little town called Noblesville, which is northeast of Indianapolis, and served there as the United Methodist Church youth director. It's the first time I was ever in a United Methodist Church or even knew what it was about. Funny, teaching confirmation when you don't know who John Wesley was quite interesting. Mm-hmm. But went through the process. That was 2 years, and then I moved. For those of you that don't know the United Methodist structure, pastors get relocated because they're elders and they're itinerant. Me as a youth director was hired locally as a church, which most youth workers are across the country, mm-hmm. right? And through him moving to a little town called Lawrenceburg, Indiana, which is about 45 minutes from downtown Cincinnati. So Michigan, Ohio. Do you see the tension there? There's a lot. I get all kinds of junk every time I go to church. But in that process of me moving as a youth director, I turned on to the fact that at about the 5-year mark, kids were coming back going, can you do my wedding? Can you do communion, baptisms, and that? And I couldn't. So I went through the track of local pastor, which basically is you take a lot of courses, you get credentialed while you're in the local congregation. And then in about 2019, the rails kind of started to fall off in the United Methodist Church. Big controversy, won't go there. But the Global Methodist Church kind of formed out of that. And through my studies and my convictions from a conservative standpoint, I felt it was the best move for me to move into the Global Methodist Church. And I'll be a deacon then an elder, which is permanent as long as you follow the guidelines and rules. And just recently announced in my church, I'm actually resigning my position after 15 and a half years at our church. And my last Sunday will be December 11th, which, sorry for dates, but then I'll be physically done December 31st of 2022. And in the COVID timeframe, we really started to looking at how ministry happens and did a lot of online stuff. And through a course of things going bad with the UMC, issues within our own local church, most of my ministry is outside the walls. We started an organization called 2Engage, the number 2Engage, .org. And what it all is about is inspiring teens and people to connect and equip them to be inspired to impact the world for Christ through technology and particularly through small groups, which is, Russell, why we had the conversation, right?
Yeah.
And the whole goal for us is to continue to make an impact in the world. One thing, unfortunately, I'm seeing in our area is the churches are becoming a lot less effective in doing ministry because of the damage, I think, that we as parents received from our parents. And we're saying we will not make our kids go to church. Therefore, their kids aren't going to church. So within that realm, we landed on a thing when we started, my wife and I started going back to church in the 90s called small groups. The church we were in was a Willow Creek denominational, like affiliated church, and they did small groups really well. And through that small groups, we built friendships and did community. And I said, there's something to this. There's some importance to being in a large church worshiping, right? Whether it's 50,000, but there's something to be in doing life with other people that are like-minded, that you can be honest and raw with, but also you can grow in Christ with, you can laugh, you can eat food with, pretty much you can do life with. So we kind of evolved a process of running small groups and focusing on small groups. So in a nutshell, Jon Batch, been doing this for a long time. I started with hair and no beard. We have 4 kids. They're all adult children. Our kids have grown up through our youth ministry system. And an important part about small groups is my kids were in my youth group, but I wasn't their pastor. I was their dad. They had a small group leader that they could go to complain about the youth pastor. They couldn't do that to their dad, right? Because I'd be like, why are you complaining about me? I'm perfect, or the fear of it. But they had another significant Christ follower in their life that was mature, that would help guide them the same way I would, or every Christian parent would, right? We always need that advocate. So that's kind of me in a nutshell. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, our origin stories in youth ministry are pretty much the same. I had gone off to college and came back after a summer. No, I came back during the Christmas break, and the youth leader found me and said, "Hey, we're doing a lock-in and we need some more adults."
Dude, who does that? That like this. And my buddy, he's in California now. I talked to him yesterday, and I'm like, "You're an idiot. Why would you do that?" He goes, "Well, you're still in the game, aren't you?"
That's right.
You know, I'm like, "Yeah, good point."
That's what got me in, and I did that, and I came back the next summer after a semester of school. I was looking for a summer job, and one of the youth leaders that was there said, "Hey, you did a great job at the lock-in. Have you ever thought about doing youth ministry?" And that was both of our same origin, and the result is the same as my child actually is 11, and he next year will be in the youth program, and so that'll be interesting. I knew this day was coming. I'm a lead pastor, but also still really involved with all that. That's the nice thing about being at a smaller church, is I can still do a lot of things. But he won't be in my specific program, but he is at my church. And so that will be interesting. My next 8 years or 7 years of him growing up and doing that.
Yeah. And let me throw out a point of advice, senior pastor, dad of a youth. Your child's not perfect, and he's going to have an opinion like every other kid's opinion, and it's probably not the right one. I don't mean to be rude, but it's like, I come home and say it was a great youth night, and my wife's not there at the time, and she asked my son, and he said it was terrible. I'm like, it was one of the best we've ever done in 30 years of ministry, but he said it was bad. So temper that as a senior pastor and a dad. To understand that it's his opinion. It may be accurate, but also don't always take it for he's a teenager.
And I think what you've already alluded to, and we're going to get into this with small groups, is having other adults who are
So
pouring
important.
into the lives of your students.
So important.
So why don't you, I mean, before we get into small groups, talk about that a little bit. Why is that important?
I think there's such an importance of having other people involved in your kid's life that are safe and good people, because it does really take a village to raise a person.
Mm-hmm.
And that adage, I think, is really true. And often people go, well, you can't do it through technology. I don't agree with that. I think if you have caring adults that are safe and equipped, they'll be able to care for children. Liken it to a good football coach or a good drama director. You know, our local area has a very large, like our football team went to state in one state by like 30 points just this last week over Thanksgiving. The band has maybe, I would say hypothetically, 50 members in it. They probably have 200 parents and adults that serve, because they're giving in of themselves and feel like they're part of the community, but they're safe people that are going to invest in their kids. So my personal kids small group leaders talked my language in a different voice that confirmed the same conversation. And we've all had it. If you have kids that are teenagers, you tell your kid this thing, a, they didn't listen. Small group leader says a, and they come back and say, I learned the greatest thing in the world. Well, what was it? A. And you go like, who'd you learn that from, right?
Yeah.
But here's the challenge with that, though, in my opinion, Russell. You can't be a youth worker that's prideful. Because if you're getting youth leaders to lead small groups, which is important, it can't be all about you. We started small groups in our local church. I had my small group leaders are the best leaders that are available in my area, in my ministry. They're the number one spot because that's the most important for me, right? I was sitting talking to a friend of mine that was a small group leader at the time. One of his boys came up in church, started talking to him and said, who are you talking to? To him. And I'm like, I'm his boss. Like, you need to know who I am. you know, like, but then he introduced me, like he's my boss, which really weren't bosses, but he's a youth pastor here, blah, 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 blah. And I thought, you know what? That was a win for the ministry in the world that he didn't know me. But I also went home going, I can't believe that kid didn't know who I was. You know, like, what is Eric? At the time, it's Eric. What is Eric doing? He should be teaching his kids who I am and showing them my picture, you know, and giving a bio. It should be a quiz like, who's Jesus? Who's John? Get the second one right, you know? But so I had to swallow my pride and go, no, this isn't about me. This is about kids having caring adults that are going to impact the world. And I know physically, and I think you do too, Russell, and we all do in our world, we really get to a threshold point where we can't impact any more kids, then we just get sloppy, right? We can't manage it all. I look at Christ. He had 12 that he really invested in, right? Savior of the world, the great I am.
Yeah.
You know, I'm thinking maybe I can do 15 because I'm a little better than Jesus, but in reality, probably can really manage 3 or 4. So if I have more adults equipped and trained, right, child safety guidelines, making sure they have the right tools, making sure that my small group leaders are passionate about teenagers, I can give every person a tool. Especially you talked about Marco, Youth Cartel. He's got thousands of resources out there. Download Youth Ministry, you know, Simply Youth Ministry. There's so many resources that you could teach just about anybody to do youth ministry, but not be passionate about kids or small groups or whatever. And I think that passion will then build into the kid's life because there's authenticity. And then we're multiplying our numbers of influence, but also we're multiplying our numbers of impact, right? Because we live in a society right now that more and more people don't feel known, and most of them don't feel heard. So we kind of hit the small group in that realm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and that's, I mean, I think that's an important thing. It's one thing I learned. I can tell you the moment I learned that I had two moments. But I'll tell you what the thing is first is if you're going to get in small groups, if you haven't done small groups before, and you can tell me if I'm right or wrong, when you get into it and you hit that moment, like you said, where all of a sudden you are not the most important youth leader to them, it's their small group leader. It takes a little bit of a moment. Like I remember we would do, we have a mission trip down here called Army, where we do mission work. And one of the nights they do is dinner night out with your small group. So I thought I would replicate that with my youth. So we meet on Wednesday night or met on Wednesday nights. And once a semester, I said, do dinner out. Y'all go wherever you want with your small group leader and another parent. And they would go do that. And I remember calling around going, hey, do y'all need somebody else for your group? No, we got it. Hey, do you need somebody else for your small group? No, we've got it covered. Hey, do you need somebody? And I realized that everybody had it covered.
Yeah, can I pause? Everybody write that down. Dinner out. I wasn't not paying attention to them.
Yeah.
I was writing it down as a note because I have a 30-year and I'm like, dinner out's a good idea. Write that down.
And it was a chance for them to go out in the community and just go eat. Don't have to worry about programming anything. I usually put it on a night that was like at the end of a series or something like that, and they could go and just hang out. But I called everybody and they were like, no, we've got it covered. And finally, one of my adult leaders was like, hey, Russell, do you want to come meet with us? I was like, yes, thank you. Because now I didn't need to go there because it was covered. And for me, I kind of sat back in a moment. I said, I've reached the point that I wanted to get to, but I have to realize that there's a loss there because all of a sudden I wasn't needed. Now, what I did to set it up was needed. But at that moment, I had set it up in such a way, which was good, that the small group leaders had that. And
if you do the foundational work, sorry to interrupt, but if you do the foundational work to lay a platform that's solid and it's good, that work's going to pay off for 20, 30 years.
Yeah.
If you don't do the solid work, it's going to pay off in about 10 minutes.
Yeah.
You know, really, right, Russell? It's going to be like, it's going to crash and burn. So what we really invest the energy in to do well, it's going to, if we do as a senior pastor, I'm sure there's an expectation for you on worship on a Sunday morning or whenever you do worship. You put energy into making sure that's done well, right? And I think there's so much fruit to that. What was your other point?
The other thing that they said was, or that happened was at Senior Sunday, they recognized like it was their small group leaders who got the pictures and the gifts and the thing. And I was appreciated by other people. It wasn't like a deal, but it was like, it was nice to see they all got around the 75-year-old lady who was a small group leader who went with our kids, took them over as junior high. And it's the football team. It was like 8 from the football team, the state playoff football, it's Pleasant Grove Hawks, and went to state and won. And so she saw them all the way up through their graduation. And then she still sends them devotionals, and they're 3 or 4 years out of high school now. They're in college, and she sends them at least monthly, sends them a text message devotional. And so it was those wins that I saw. But it is a change if you're used to, because I had my kids say, hey, we remember when it was just 15 of us and we could get in the van and go somewhere. And you kind of have to lose that and move on. So, and
you were the driver of the van, you're standing on stage talking, right? Yeah, it is a reality. And I think the number one thing, if you do small groups in connection, and we can unpack this a little bit, but in connection with other ministry opportunities, understand that it's okay to feel that, what about me? But also it's even better to do something about it, because it's really not for the best of the kid and our personal life as youth workers. We can't be all to all.
Yeah.
We have to have downtime.
I was able to go focus on parents. I was able to focus on areas of ministry that I had never dreamed I would get to. I was able to do classes for parents while the small group leaders are leading their kids
that's awesome.
in the small group. So
awesome.
Anyway, so we if you're listening, we kind of just showed you the big picture and what the goal is to get to, but let's kind of dive in a little bit and see how we kind of get there. So anything else you want to say about why doing small groups? Like what's the benefits of those or?
Yeah, just to reiterate, I think the why is to help kids connect with each other and another person in a safe environment, so they can really be as transparent as they want to be, and they can see Jesus and grow in Jesus, right? And the value of that small group can be, and they could be kids from different schools, right? But I always remember growing up in Michigan, it wasn't cool to be an FCA. It wasn't cool to be a Christian. So, um, 4 years later, I'm sitting, I go to visit a church in that time where I got fired. I visit a church and I see one of my friends who happened to play for Michigan. And I'm like, what are you doing here? And he's like, you know, NFL football player. What are you doing here? I'm like, I'm going to church, man. Like, he goes, I married a girl from the Christian school. Shouldn't it have told you anything? I go, yeah, it told me when I came across the line in D defense, you knocked me out. Don't do that again. I go, no. He goes, well, I've been a Christian my entire high school. I knew this guy. Never knew he was a Christian, right?
Mhm.
So as we're doing these small groups, it gives opportunities for kids to know each other, but also when they get into a situation at school or when they're the crosstown rivalry, right? And their buddies playing, they're going to show a little bit more grace. There's going to have a safety mechanism there that I'll go by them. They're not going to make a dumb choice, so I don't have to. So it
Mhm.
creates a built-in network of care that isn't there in the large setting, in my opinion.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, so, I mean, you talked about your new engagement, your new to engage
Mhm.
in doing that, but you did start these small groups and stuff within a church, and that's kind of our
Yes.
our audience is church leaders,
Right.
new beginning
Right.
veterans or whatever. So, um, just and you can go as detailed as you want, but what is kind of your process if you were starting at a church, or what did you go through to kind of start establishing these small groups? And I may stop you and ask you to dive in a little more in some area or not, but
Yeah, please
I'm just gonna
do.
let you
Please,
talk. Yeah.
yeah, please do. So we'll go from when I moved from church in Indiana to new church in Indiana.
Okay.
As a coming in brand new youth worker, I knew two people, three, the pastor, his wife, and their daughter. That was it. So in the process of me coming on board, I needed to see what they were currently doing and what the culture was for the youth ministry, but more importantly, what the culture was for the adult ministries, right? So what is a church? So what is the church's mission, vision, purpose, right? And if the mission and vision and purpose is to get people on Sunday morning to come, then you're driving that purpose with what you do, right?
Mhm.
You might use Sunday night as an outreach opportunity to go, hey, have you ever thought about going to church? I'll
Mhm.
be here in this row. We'll reserve this row. I'll get you donuts afterwards. Please come, right? So you're gaining that knowledge. When I walked into the Dearborn Hills where I'm at currently, the overarching desire was to connect kids that weren't connected. There was a very small group of I think 25, 20 kids when we got to Dearborn Hills, and about 12 of them were not connected at all to the youth group. There was one or two families that they did everything, they chose everything, they determined everything, right? So we realized that their attempt to do small groups was really an attempt to appease an audience because that's what you should do, right? We should do youth groups, Sunday school, and we probably should do small groups to keep them out of trouble on a Wednesday night, right?
Yep.
Obviously, that failed, correct? Because the goal was to keep them out of trouble, not to grow community. So, one of the things we came in with the council, which we had a group of adults that were on a team and a couple students, and we just unpacked what are you currently doing and where do you see gaps in the mix, right? And one of the gaps in the mix was people feeling like that they were connected with each other in a way that they felt they were known. So our, up to that point, 20 years of ministry experience was going back to 1990, coming back into a church. A small group will help you be connected if the small group set up to do that, right? If it's a safe place, if you have great leadership, you have great material that you can discuss in a great space, it can be accomplished. So we went through the process then of dreaming and praying for several weeks about what small groups would look like. And then we started to build a platform of what's a small group going to look like. It's going to have two caring adults that are background checked. we're going to do them gender specific. And if the start goal was 2 small groups for junior high, 2 small groups for senior high, right? One girls, 1 guys for each.
Mhm.
Obviously, I'm running one, my wife's running one, right? The experts. So the desire then was, okay, who do we know as leaders that are passionate about students that have a desire to learn about small groups, and how can we recruit them? So the youth pastor, you go out and talk to people and you get no answers. And then you send the youth out to go, hey, would you be interested in having a conversation and praying about being a small group leader? They're like, yeah, I'd talk to John. It's the same thing we talked about earlier with your kid, right? He doesn't want to hear you, but so then in that process of recruiting the leaders, you're establishing that criteria by which a youth leader or a small group leader would hold to, right? And I think for some, it's who are you going to let on stage to talk to your kids instead of you doing it,
Mhm.
right? That's an area where most youth workers across the U.S. are very particular. They don't let just anybody get on there. So for us, the ministries that were going on in Sunday school and Sunday night were adequate for that audience. And we took a pivot. We're still maintaining those, but in the process of that next month or 2 months, we were preparing our church youth ministry to make a pivot to, we are doing Sunday school and youth group, but we're going to put emphasis on small groups.
Yeah.
Right.
I want to put a pin in your pivot.
Yeah, go ahead.
But I wanted to mention something that you mentioned at the beginning that is foundational, and that was you going in for several weeks or months, I don't know how long, and learning the cultures.
Oh, it was
not
6
only
months.
of your
6 months, Russell.
Yeah. Because that is, you don't know what you're going into. You have to know their language, just like you would go to Bolivia or Ecuador, do the same thing. I mean, anything you can drill down in that.
Well, and the tag on that, here's why you need to learn the culture. Because if in the youth group or adult ministry group, anything but the main church, if you establish your own culture, it's going to work for you and only you.
Mm-hmm.
Orange, for example, is a material that you can use. It's a great material. We know the people that made that material, right? And it's an amazing material. But if the church as a whole doesn't subscribe to the idea of using orange, it's not going to work, right?
Yeah.
Because it's designed for the whole community to use. So as I'm developing my youth ministry's vision, purpose, and goals, it was mine, right? It was easy to get leaders to buy into it, but it didn't match what the church was. And guess what? When the church is deciding to do something, your goals are different than their goals, or your vision is, there's a problem, right? So as I'm learning what the church culture is, even in the interview stage, right? And I'm getting to know key leaders and getting to know key areas in the ministry or in the community, like who gives cheapest pizza for our pizza nights, right? You want to make those connections, like, is McDonald's giving me gift cards when I need them, et cetera, et cetera. I am working with the senior pastor to go, what's our purpose? What are we about? We want to do small groups because it's going to help accomplish that purpose. People from the outside feeling connected to the inside.
Yeah.
Right. So within that conversation, we are establishing what the vision and purpose is of our ministry, because we know what the purpose of the church's ministry is. And here's the importance of that. If the children's ministry are doing it, youth are doing it, college is doing it, young adults are doing it, and their adults are doing it, it's going to be a lot easier to get volunteers. And it's going to be so much easier for the kid to transition from kid to youth to college to adult to serving, right? And it's going to be so much easier for the parents, because as a parent of 4 children, their youth pastor did not communicate well enough to their dad what was going on in advance. And I'm the same person, right? So it creates a culture of uniformity and purpose. So hopefully I kind of hit the head of that question. It really is important to know. And I say this too, you only have one first chance to start something. Make it a good one.
Yeah.
Right. Set yourself up to the win to go, hey, you know what, Russell, I'm going to take you to the Red Stadium and we're going to hit balls to the Cy Young Award winning pitcher. You're like, what do I bring?
Yeah.
Nothing.
Yeah.
Like, do you want me to practice batting? And do I need a hat? No, just come. You're like, this is going to fail. Right. And I don't want to look like an idiot on the big screen when I can't even swing the bat, right?
Yeah.
Right. So it's like that. If we're going to try to establish these ministries or an event, let's do it well enough that it's going to have a chance for success as opposed to automatically setting up to fail.
Yeah.
We set up our small group ministry to succeed where if all the other stuff fell away, we care about kids feeling like they're part of community, because I can rebuild youth. I could rebuild Sunday school, or if our church says we're no longer doing Sunday school, I'm like, all right, we're doing small groups, right? My best leaders are small group leaders. And we've got an open invitation to every kid with the idea and training that we have 2 leaders with the idea of you're recruiting another leader and we're going to split and birth new groups.
Yeah.
Not at the expense of the original group, but because of the original group. And that's probably the biggest hurdle. It's my group. I don't want to change.
And I think that was the key that I wanted to kind of reemphasize is that being very intentional and getting on page with your lead pastor, your senior pastor. We have I think Luke Gajari, I think is another podcast we have that talks about getting on, because if you're not on the same page, it's not going to work.
And guess what, friends? You will not be working there.
Yeah.
The senior pastor will always win.
Yeah. And so that's just one of those things, just being intentional from the beginning and starting slow. So anyway, I wrote down.
And let me say this too, because we did a student leadership academy and I'm friends with Josh Griffin. And I asked Griff personally, how do you lead from the middle? Because he's never going to be the senior pastor. And he said 2 big things that were huge, and I'll give you freebies. Number 1 was you over communicate up. So anything that's going on in the ministry, good or bad, you're telling your boss before everybody else is. And then you encourage down. So every leader you have underneath you, you build up like they're the Michael Jordan of your world, right? Realistically. So lead up to make sure you're communicating everything that needs to be communicated to, so they're informed and not surprised, but encourage down to make sure your leaders are being cared for.
Yeah. Josh, actually, I don't know, I'll put the episode number in the show notes, but he was one of our guests that Brent interviewed a while ago.
I love Josh Griffin.
Yes, and probably has your Star Wars trivia, like, is amazing for him.
He's we'll talk about addiction. He's addicted to it. I just kind of dabble. I like Yoda.
All right, so you talked about pivoting to small groups, and you're kind of in that. If I can draw you back into where that was, so so go ahead and finish or continue your story before I interrupt you again.
So key times, I think, to start a small group would be at the first of the year or as you're running into your fall programming, right? And part of that now with the technology, with download and other resources, even this podcast, you get real good tools to be able to do that where you can market it very well. So you're training your leaders for the launch. You're attracting key students to be in those small groups prior to you even launching, right? So at launch day, you have material, leader trek material, group publishing material, orange material, whatever it may be. You've trained your leaders on how to use it and they're safe, right? And you've established rooms that you're going to meet. And then at launch, you are marketing your small groups. So you have all your leaders stand up is the easiest way. I'm Jon Batch. I'm leading a guys group of 9th grade boys. We are the most amazing group in the world. So anybody else that's not going to be in our group will be in the second group that doesn't count. So come join my group, right? And then they all announce and you give the goal at the beginning and at the end of why you're doing small groups. We want you to feel connected and we want you to have a place to bring your friends to feel connected as well, right? We're creating a safe place. We have expectations of you showing up and participating in that hour. We'll feed you, we'll give you content, we'll have conversations and we'll pray. And then At the end of that, you re-emphasize, this is what we're doing. This is why we're doing it. If you haven't signed up for one, you got till whatever date is, and then you publish those lists that you have, and then you give them to your leaders, and then you launch, right? And the key to launching is there's two different ways of doing it. You could launch a small group that happens after your youth group time. So say you're a 60-minute youth group, you can add an extra 30 minutes on and do all your talking and all your fun and all your playing. You can eat, play, talk. And then as you break into small group, those small group leaders will get the printout of your lesson if you dictate it, or at least lesson questions that then they break off into their spaces. And then that first group is, okay, Russell, we're in a small group. What things are important to you that we need to live by? Number one, what's said in the group stays in the group, unless you're going to kill somebody yourself, et cetera,
Yep.
right? Because we don't want a group that's not safe. Every and these are kids that are generating these ideas, or as a small group leader, we're prompting them, right? Everybody has a chance to talk. If Joe's talking, no one else is talking. But also Joe can't talk the whole entire time, right? We're going to try to do what we can. We have small group leaders, people, you'll have them that you give them 12 questions. They have to get through the 12 questions or they failed. You have other leaders that you give them one question and they don't do the question, right? So we have the spread, which is fine, but helping them understand these questions are a guide to have conversation, right? If these triggers happen, you need to come back to me and we need to talk about those triggers. And then they do the small group time. You bring them all back together, do a final song or a final game or a final closing challenge thought for the week. And then you're done. Then I say, leaders, hang out for 15 minutes, do a quick debrief. What went well, what went bad. Next Monday, here's the talk that we're going to have. Here's your questions. We will give you cards of all the students that are in your group, and we want you to reach out to them, text message. Obviously, if your church allows that, right? They might not, but communicate with them. Some go to the extent of you need to go to a game for them. Me is, Russell's my small group leader. I want you to show up for small group. What about the other stuff? No, small group. If you can commit to doing the small group and you feel like you want to go to a game, let me know. I'll pay for you to go. If you can only commit to a small group and you're gonna do small group, good. I've got you for 120 minutes a week. So part of it is what you're trying to get out of it, but most of it is within that context, having the right leaders, making sure that the group is determining realistically what the expectation should be. And that gives you the ability to help self-govern it because they made up the rules. It's not Russell's rules. It's like, okay, Johnny, you just said we all need to be here and you're skipping out. But that was your one desire. Okay, so what's going on? And the big points are make sure the kids feel safe, give them an opportunity to converse, right? Now, 25 years later, we get the material. I go in and the first question I ask my kids, how was your week? And they're like, well, my grandma died. My dog got beat up. Our football team got beat by Michigan. I just threw that in there for effects, right? And then you do the talk, right? The lesson, leader track's got lessons. You just go through the lesson, read the scripture, ask these questions, and you go, what prayer requests do you have? None. And I'm like, Russell, you just said that, and 25 minutes ago, you just said your grandma died. Is that something worthy of praying, right? They're like, yeah, okay, well, we'll pray for your family in that loss, right? And then you're able then to follow up, right? And we're talking Sunday night, you're able to follow up with the leader that said your youth pastor or even senior pastor. Hey, this family's hurting because grandma died. They don't go to church here. You might have even done the funeral, Russell, but I need you to know there's some issues there
Mhm.
during staff meeting. I want you to know there's some struggles here that maybe as a ministry church, we can go minister to their family,
Mhm.
right? With Stephen ministry or the children's ministry person could write a note to the little kid or
Mhm.
be sensitive. So then you can do more holistic memory. Now, the other end of the spectrum, we do a small group. It's called Live from the RV. It's all on Discord, which is like Zoom. And we do a book. Everybody in the group has an Experiencing God day-to-day devotional, which Blackaby did with his kid.
Uh-huh.
And it basically is a devotion, right? We have kids. I'm in like 45 minutes from Cincinnati. We have a kid in the Air Force Academy in Denver, right? Well, Colorado Springs, she attends. We have a guy that was one of our students is in Marine Corps, and he was at 23 Palm and attended Live from the RV, right? And our criteria for that is we have college leaders that lead it. I oversee it. He facilitates it all. We have one person every week that does the prayer, one person that'll read the devotion, one person that'll ask the question on the devotion, and one person that will do a challenge. So we have 5 people, 4 people have to do the work, and it's all very interactive. It's very organic. If today's date's the 1st of December, we do that devotion. Someone reads it,
Uh,
someone comes up with a question, someone comes up with the week challenge, and we do prayer. It's
mhm.
so cool that we do it in 35 minutes,
Uh,
right? So it's all about the intentionality of connecting with those persons, whether in person or being on the internet. I think you can I think you can make a person feel extremely disconnected in person and not wanted. And you can make a person feel so loved online that they are there every single week, right?
yeah.
It's not the median, it's what we do with the median that we use,
Yeah.
including material, including that 30 minutes of time to maximize it.
Yeah.
So that's kind of two different slants.
Yeah. And I mean, one of the things I've realized through COVID was I was flipped into digital, especially for some of my college students. I was like, "Hey, could y'all want to get together on a Thursday night and do a
That's
Zoom, and
huge,
we'll play some
huge.
Jackbox games or whatever like that, and a little bit of prayer time." And we did. We played bingo. We played all sorts of stuff. And then it dawned on my head. I was like, "We've had this technology for 10 years."
Or
And
more.
more. And I haven't gotten those college students who graduated from our group who are struggling to find their place where they are back together once a month to do this. And so we kept doing that. And that was something we learned. I always ask the questions of guests and of business leaders and stuff. I said, what did you learn during the pandemic or what did you start doing? You'll never stop doing. What did you stop doing? You'll never do again. And
Live from the RV.
yeah.
And it stemmed. We have a student came back from Purdue. His mom said, if you want to go on vacation, you have to, because she has a immune compromised
Uh-huh.
system. She said, if you want to go on vacation with your buddies, you got to live in the RV. So he got his food brought to him in the RV. It was like a hotel for him, right?
Huh.
Because he
Yeah.
had to do it for 3 days. And we were doing this Zoom thing. And I go, where are you at? He goes, I'm in the RV. And he goes, I'm live from the RV. And I went, and think about the RV format, right? You take your home with you,
Uh-huh.
right? And oftentimes in the church world, I'm seeing more and more, and I think we're probably at the top end of the group that really miss this, but
Hmm.
we take our faith with us, right?
Hmm.
We live in a generation before us where faith only happened in the building when church was going on.
Hmm.
Their world was, I'm a faithful person while I'm in this building, and I'm another person out here, right? The two worlds are separate.
Yeah.
And with COVID really exposed for me, because we did those youth group things too. We used um Download had a game system. I forget what it's called right
Yeah.
now. Oh, Josh would be so ticked. But we use that
I won't
as
tell
we use that. Oh, he'll know. We'll use that as a platform, and we ran youth group. And to me, our church were all upset about this online platform, and I'm like, dude, I'm in this kid's bedroom, which I'm calling the mom going, it'd be best for you not to let your kid have a computer in his bedroom. But like,
them.
and we played a game where it was a scavenger hunt. So the wheel turned and it said, you got to go get a family picture.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, this is my big take home. So they would run in the picture. And then that night, I get a text message from a mom going, why is my kid running around like trying to strip his dad of his right sock and drinking milk out of it? And I'm like, oh, mental note. If you're going to do the scavenger hunt, please warn the parents either to hide the stuff or your kid's going crazy breaking the wall, especially if you have twins in the same house. They're on
Yeah.
computers. So, and you triggered something to me. We had this technology for 10 years. We still have the technology now. And in most cases, we've, as churches, have thrown it away because we were back to in person.
Mm-hmm.
But is that really the wisest thing to do if your mission and vision is to reach, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or to do whatever XYZ is? Because right now, we're in a funky situation right now because of the church stuff. But if the school shuts down and our community shuts us down completely, I have a friend in California that just within the last 3 to 4 months started to do functional regular youth ministry
Mm-hmm.
from COVID.
Uh-huh.
I can go, we have a blizzard, great. Go to the Zoom page, which is password protected. Hit the link. We're doing youth group tonight.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I can't get there. You don't need to. I've got every resource I need to run youth group when I can, right? So if
Yeah.
nothing else, you have that in your back pocket that you can use in an emergency.
Yeah. Well, but even not just emergency though, but so one of the things I realized, and we're gonna need to do a part like 12 on this, but
I'm sorry.
that's like, no, it's great stuff. I realized that when I went through my list, I had my 60 kids who came on a Wednesday night, and it was great. And I was successful because I had 60 kids. The church loved it. I loved it. It was success. Well, when I went through my list during COVID and calling everybody, there's 120 kids on the list.
Yeah.
There's some that we haven't
Yeah.
connected with that I've actually been failing all this time because we haven't connected with them, haven't done that. And we realize that. And, some of it's because they're in dance or they're in this that meets on Wednesday nights. And so why can't we utilize some of the same stuff that we were using for COVID and keep those connections? I mean, I found with my online for the church, just the church services are watched more by people who just couldn't get there that morning. The kids got sick that morning or whatever like that. It's not necessarily a huge reaching the community. It's keeping people connected week to week that they can do that.
Right. And let me circle back to small group because you said 60 kids. So we had those 25 kids. We're growing our youth ministry, right? It's growing leaps and bounds. There's another church. He's actually my next door neighbor, was the youth pastor at the church down the street from me, which is funny because we live right next door to each other. And we discovered that our small groups were very effective. But if in this area, church isn't as important as sports and drama and band and academic team, all that. We realized that our second pivot with small group ministry was if we do it only on Wednesday night, because at one time on Wednesday night, we have a very large church building. The senior pastor had an event in our fellowship hall, and his wife had a children's ministry event in one of the children's ministry room. Our small groups were meeting in every other room, including my office. Obviously, there was no junior high boys in my office. It was girls that were high schoolers with my wife. So, we had 75 kids in small groups. So we went from 25 to 75.
That was our story too.
Great success, right? But we realized there was a significant amount of kids that weren't going to be able to be there because they had sports or they had academic team or to work. So our pivot came with those still great leaders, right? Because we're growing leadership. And by this time, our leadership pool was getting large, right? If you got 12 small groups, you're talking 24 leaders, right?
Yeah.
Our next season that came up, which was going to be the spring or going into the fall, right? Our plan was starting in January was to plant the seed of our small group leaders of the next cycle of small groups we run, because we give every leader off from June until August. They need a 2-month break. We don't ask them to come to anything. Take a break. If you want to come, you can, but I'm going to question you while you're here.
Yeah.
If you're here because there's free ice cream, great. But don't come, take the time off. And we're pivoting to, as a leader, we're going to give you the material. You pick the day of the week that works for your co-leader and student, and we're going to run groups. So we went from one night a week to physically 5 different opportunities, different day opportunities for kids to get in small groups, right? So then they started happening at the local Subway, which is like a little, Jimmy John's type place.
Yeah.
And the small group
Subway.
leader, right? The small group leader is saying, hey, I had a great night. We've been meeting here for 3 weeks. 2 of the workers that are high school kids, boys, this is a girl small group, overheard us talking and said, hey, can you pray for my family because my aunt's sick?
Mm-hmm.
And they're like, yes, do you need a small group? Talk to this person. He'll get you in a small group over there, right? So we're developing the idea that this is the pride thing we talked about earlier, Russell, big time. Like, kids didn't even know who I was. My name was known, but they knew the small group leader met at this location consistently at this night, and some met in the school, some met in our church building.
Mm-hmm.
Most of them physically met at a coffee shop or a restaurant. And it's like, kid, pick the group with the group leader that best fits your needs in this season of life.
Mm-hmm.
If Mondays are open, I don't work on Mondays.
Mm-hmm.
I'm the youth pastor. You're off on Fridays. I'm off on Monday. I'm not working. And we had 3 small groups running. And I did nothing. Give them material, give them encouragement. But we also had a sign-in sheet. And then our 2 Engage is coming up with an application that will do it all. We physically had a sign-in sheet that the kids signed in. And then that was a picture that was sent to me. So we were always taking attendance.
Mm-hmm.
If there was a guest, they filled out a guest card. Within 24 hours, they were getting a postcard from me saying, we're glad you came. One of the youth workers down the road, he moved to a different church. He would take those, remember the movie theater boxes of candy?
Mm-hmm.
Those can put a mailing label on a stamp in it, and you can mail it without extra charges. So he would buy the $1 candy, know the kid's favorite candy, and he would send them a box of Reese's in the mail. I'm like, that's smart.
Yeah.
I still don't do it. That's 3 years ago. But they always get that interaction, right?
Yeah.
And then we're getting information from them that then we can email their parents or them and go, hey, get this to your parents, because then we can gather more information on their family.
Yeah.
So there was always that entry point of getting in, but we opened it up where they could do it when they wanted, right? Because they're trained, right? They're me to their world of small group. So they're representing us equally well, with the importance of it's an important thing to represent well.
So because that's kind of a different model too, from I give a talk and we talk about it to they're not gathered together at all. In that case, how did you make any cohesion with that, or did they kind of do their own thing, or what did you?
Super challenging.
Yeah.
Because you have leaders that want to do their own thing, and then you have leaders that don't. So what our pivot was, we were using at the time group publishing, huge. Maddie McCage was running the live material. So we were using the live material to teach off of and as small group material for about a year and a half, right?
Mm-hmm.
So people were familiar with the material. So what we started doing is emailing the leader or putting it in an envelope at the church that they could pick up that had that leader lesson in it, right? And then once a week, we would produce the material for them. And then I would say, here's key points for the week. Make sure you make these announcements, because we still want kids engaged, right, in the youth group or, the all-nighter or whatever. I've only ever done one all-nighter in my entire life. That was the first thing I ever did. I haven't done one since. I'm an anti-all-nighter guy because I think it burns out leaders, and Christian kids just come to it. But we would give them the material to use, the sign-in sheet, the cards for guests, and provide them the content. If there was a leader that I trusted to do their own thing, they were required to meet with me and give me all the material in advance what they were going to teach on. Right? So we were then providing them to be, in this group, the youth pastor. The important thing that, and the one mistake, if I'd go back and do, we would have done a monthly meeting of all leaders, small group leaders, mandatory at either the end of the month or the start of the month to talk about what's coming up in the next month, right? We didn't do that as well as I would have liked to have done because there was still some disconnection because they weren't a part of the group. And then the other thing that we would do is because we had groups doing their own thing, we once a month would have a special night pre-planned that all the groups were required to come to for their youth group for that week, if they were only going to meet for that 1 hour. And then we had them all in our gym, and light bulbs were clicking in with leaders because I had a leader come up to me afterwards and said, Jon, there's like 100 kids in here. She had a group of 6 with another lady. You know, at the most they had 12. She goes, I didn't know there was this many kids. And I'm like, yeah, that's the importance of why we're doing small groups where we're doing them, because the more are going to get ministered to and when they show up. So that large group connectivity is not there. You have to be intentional about making it. We do an annual white elephant gift exchange, right? You play games and you give away junk that you don't want in your office. Right? We found that if the small group leader came, the kids naturally were sitting next to, if not right on top of their small group leader, which automatically put you into groups to play games. Right? And then you break up and you're building that community, large community within the small community. Right? So the importance of that small group is if you want to be connected to the larger group, you have to be intentional about that connection points.
So, tons of things. I've written down a bunch of stuff that we will not get to. But I think
we can do another podcast.
We'll definitely do another one. I think one of the things that is important to remember too is you've mentioned a bunch of different ways to do small groups. I mean, either meeting and meeting afterwards. I remember Justin Knowles talks about doing.
Yeah, he's a good dude.
They do all their big group stuff on one night of their event. Like after on one night, they stay late for an extra 2 hours and do a dance or do games or whatever like that. But they did actually a video for a while, especially during COVID. Their small groups would meet wherever, and he would record the message on a video. And we actually did that for us. I would record,
which is huge.
Yeah.
And this is always my pushback to Griff. Like the majority of the people I work with, don't know how things are recorded, don't have a TV in their room to show. So those things work great if you have the technology to be able to do it. Right.
Well, your phone helps, but it is showing that there are multiple ways because you can do small groups just with, either the night of or different nights having big groups in or not having big groups or being on the same material or not being on the same material. And I was going to ask you about material, but I'm just going to have you send me a list of things that you've used. So I know
let me just throw out, I'll throw out 3 names.
Okay.
Download Youth Ministry has a thing that if you're a gold member, it costs you annually like $300.
Get the gold membership.
Right. You get $20 of free merchandise to purchase from the store other youth workers put in, and they give you quality content. The 2 places I would go to for content, group publishing has kind of dropped off a lot since Simply Youth Ministry has not been around, but the Live material is really solid for teaching large group, but also small group. And the other one is my go-to is Doug Franklin at Leader Treks. They have a discipling mindset, in my opinion, that no one else has in the country. They want to grow Christ followers for the impact of the world in their own families. And they have a lot of resources on Leader Trek that are easy plug and play resourcing. So those are the 2 big ones for me, and download's always good.
And we've used Grow and done a lot of stuff with
stuff too.
Kenny and Elle there. And she actually talks about volunteers, which I wanted to get before we ran out of time. Is you've talked a little bit about volunteers, but I know that's like a thorn in the side of many youth leaders is trying to get other people involved. So can you just kind of, as your kind of closing question is kind of like, how are you finding and equipping those leaders? Anything you want to add to what or at least bring it to a succinct soundbite for people to hear?
Yes. The 2 things that are important about search or having small group leaders, you never stop looking. So you always have a role that you need a leader, student or adult, that you need to fill, right? The moment that you say, I'm good, you're not, right? So we're always, every conversation I have at church, every conversation I have in the community is, could this person be my small group leader? Or could this person be the snack provider that I can grow to be the small group leader, right? So there's always a place for someone to plug in. And I think there's an untapped resource. Students know who they want to be led by. And if you give them the equipment, they will go and ask the leaders to be, you need a venting process, but never stop looking for small group leaders or leaders in general, and use your resources of who's, Russell, we're doing small groups. I'm going to have you do a small group. Who do you want to do it with? Well, I got a friend named Jim. Is he a believer? Can he pass a background check? Do you trust him? Yes, yes, yes. All right, let's meet. Russell just got his own small group leader who I hope to grow a relationship with Jim, but honestly, I don't care because Russell has a safe guy that he's willing to do group with. Russell's in charge. We're going to grow this guy into our community, right? So kids know, other leaders know. Sometimes I would never have a parent do their kid's small group because they need someone that's similar, talking a different dialect in the same words as their parents are.
But with small groups, you can do that. You're not having parents over 40 kids. You're having easily a parent over a group over here while their kids in a group over here.
Right. And you team it up that they do them at the same time and they're in different spaces of the world. It's very effective. So the two big things is don't ever stop looking, but know what criteria you're looking for in the person, and make sure you're enabling your other people that you currently have to help you get small groups, leaders, or band members. I don't play in the band. I barely clap on. Like, I don't clap during worship because I don't want Jesus to leave me behind because I don't want to be a part of that number. You know what I mean? You know what I'm talking about. It's like, there's no way that you have any sort of beat rhythm that you're clapping to because you don't even know what you're doing. I don't want to be a part of that. But I know that there's a kid that plays in the band. My next door neighbor, he doesn't play instruments. He had his worship team of youth would go and do retreats for other people. They were that good because he got a person that was musical and equipped a kid who kept inviting his musician friends to be in a relationship. Now his former kids are the youth or the worship leaders at his current church that he's no longer at as college kids. So use your resources of people to attract other people because they know who they want to work with. Still have your venting process, but use your resources wisely and never stop looking. Never stop looking. Oh, and I have a hit list. I call it the hit list. I always have a list of names that I'm trying to impact for the kingdom. Like Russell had a hit list because Russell and I were talking about trying to get together, trying to get Global Methodist youth workers in Indiana connect. And I get a message from this guy named Russell on Facebook Messenger. And I go, where are you at? He's like, Texas. And I'm like, well, that's not Indiana, dude. Like, this is for Indiana. And then Russell's like, oh, by the way, I do a podcast. Would you ever be interested in being on a podcast? And I'm like, hit list, right?
Yeah.
You see an opportunity, you pick it. So always have a hit list of names that you want to invest in and talk to, and always be adding to that list. Never stop. Never. The weakest moments I've had in ministry is when I stopped making the list.
Yeah. And there's no perfect person or nobody who fits the right deal. Like I said, I had my 75 or 70-year-old lady who did a great job, and I've had 18-year-olds who've done a great job. And you got to watch your age, stuff like that. Right. I had because we were in the building and we could be in rooms and have doors open and things like that. Not always have two adults, but I had like high school junior seniors who were helping lead junior high small groups.
Yeah, beautiful.
And what was funny was great was they not only had a relationship with their kids that they were leading, but they built a stronger relationship with the adults, and they were like going prom dress shopping with them when their mom couldn't go, and building those relationships. And it's those high schoolers who now I can count 5 of them who are in ministry, who are youth directors, who are worship leaders, who are leading small groups. Because my goal with small groups was, when you graduate, especially if you're one of my leadership kids, when you graduate, I want you to be able to lead a small group in college. And I've had two of them on this podcast about maintaining faith and going through that. So,
and I would put one caution out there.
Yeah.
And this is, and I don't think it's a grade thing, It's a kid thing. Youth worker, do not take a 8th grader moving into 9th grade who was a peer and have him now be in charge
Yeah.
of his peers,
Yeah.
because it's going to fail.
Yeah.
Right. Because he doesn't have the maturity. But yesterday, for my 8th grade boy, yesterday, I was his buddy. Now I'm telling him what to do. That's not going to work. So you have to have some really discernment in that process as well.
And that's not just with junior high. That's your high school students who are graduating,
True.
who are just hanging out. Like, you want to make
True.
sure you're not putting them right over the kids who they were just hanging out with the night before.
Right. I
or the year
personally would
before.
use college kids for, I wouldn't match my high school with my junior hires. I know some people that do it very successfully. I always want them to be removed a layer from that group.
Yeah.
You know, but not too far of a layer. I had a student, Paul, I call him Big Nasty. Paul was a kid that was in someone else's small group. He went off to college, was an idiot, then found navigators, got reconnected. Him and I led a small group together because he was coming back into the community and was really on fire for God. I got to invest with him. He's one of my best friends now. But also he had the distance, but they knew who he was.
Yeah.
But they didn't know him. You know, it's like, oh, so he can relate. Paul knows more than I do.
Yeah.
He's still got the same look as me. Exactly. It's brown and not gray, but he knew that. So you got to be really discerning on how you match them. But I think it works.
And I think that's the key. Is like, I mean, obviously there were some kids I was not going to let lead small groups, but there were some who were wise beyond their years, and that's all a discernment process, and that's all that's all that thing about vetting and knowing who they are.
Make them fill out an application to earn the right to serve. You know,
I think, and that is a huge thing. Because, and I think Doug Fields taught me this with several other things, but was, you know, one of the things he taught is like, you know, the youth directors who became the youth director because they raised their hand to use the bathroom and came back and they had, you know, volunteered. But the other was, if they're not going to take time to fill out an application, then do you really want them? Are they going to give the time to commit to your small group? And you want to make sure that, even though it's not probably not necessarily the same appropriate, but if you see a kid in an adult over in the corner talking, you want to have 195, 200% confidence that you know what that conversation is. You know that adult knows the boundaries. You know that student is safe, and you know parents can know that too, and so that you have those stuff. So no matter who you're getting, whether it's a high school or a college or a 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70-year-old, whatever that is, that you do have that application, that vetting process throughout the whole thing.
Oh, for sure. So, and here's just, if I can real quick, throw out a thing. So do you know Dan Webster? They call him Webb. He did SYMC stuff for a while.
Okay.
He runs an organization, a youth ministry. Right. He's from Michigan, and then he moved south. Well, Dan Webster had the largest youth group in the world. He was, when Crystal Cathedral was at their high point, he was their youth minister. Dan Webster then went to Willow Creek and was doing youth ministry at Willow with Bill Hybels when it first started. Okay. Right. So Webb had this idea. It's Authentic Leadership Incorporated.com. Webb had this idea that he was going to grow leaders, right? So Webb was investing in students that he saw potential to be a leader. And now those leaders are leading churches all across the U.S. Dan Webster invested in a guy named Dave Corsten, who grew up, went out to Colorado, went to a little place called Grand Haven, Michigan, landing in Grand Haven, Michigan, and a beat up, broken youth pastor showed up at his church and said, "Hey, I'm willing to volunteer with you." His name was Jon Batch. Jon Batch then was challenged by Dave Corson, who was mentored by Dan Webster, to get back in the game of youth ministry. Full circle, Jon Batch was mentoring Noah Corsten, who was Dave Corsten's son, who is now working. He did the Sweat Room podcast, but now is working for Dame Ramsey Solutions. Mm-hmm. So if we're intentional about investing in people, this is and I think small groups particularly, it's a generational impact. Mm-hmm. Because if Webb didn't invest in Corsten, who didn't invest in me, his son wouldn't have had the spiritual advisor that he did through me, because none of it would have happened.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's generational and impactful to a world that really, really, we don't think of it as, we think of it as one more kid or one more leader, but the trickle down effect that it's shaping the history. And as our world gets so much challenged to feel, I see a lot of students and people going, they don't know their identity, right? Because the world's so gray and it's not telling them what their identity is or helping them. And the church world's not helping them, doing an adequate job of providing them the opportunity to find that UMC to GMC, right? We're both in that mix. But as we get caring adults that can help the kid navigate in a safe place in a biblical way, knowing what's right and wrong, who Christ is, what marriage is supposed to be like, even though their life isn't a good example of that, we're helping them to get the foundations to be a strong Christian. And as my girls go out to the college world, we have done a really crappy job, Russell, of raising young men to be spiritual leaders. And think about it. Most of the leaders in the church are women, because we as children's ministry workers and youth workers aren't raising up godly men to lead well, because we're not caring for them. We're not being an example for them. We're just assuming it's going to happen by osmosis. Webster's like, no, and he went to Dave Corsten and said, I see something different about you. Do you want to have a cup of coffee? He's like, sure. Webb's like, I think you could be a student leader and you can impact people, because I see something in you. You want to read this book? You want to meet once a month? He's like, sure. Dave Corsten now, he worked at Navigators. He's at World Challenge, and he goes around to the country and tells people, thanks for supporting World Challenge. He was at Navigator Press. He was at Focus on the Family as an employee. We don't understand the impact of a little bit of time in God prompting us and providing us a platform to care and invest in people. What's going to happen in 10 years? And they may be marrying your son. You know what I mean? It's like, it gets
or being in church. Yeah. Well,
right.
and that's the, and that happens in those small groups. It's not going to happen with 100 people or 200 people or 700 people and a pastor on the front of the stage. So that's why small groups are important.
And guys, if you're a little church of 6 people, you've got a small group. So to grow your group large, start investing in those kids, have them invite a friend, start investing in leaders, and build the core of it before you build, you got the students to show up. I think often, I always said to this, and I'll end on this, Russell. I said, God, give me a large ministry. God, bring me all these people. And one night, when I wasn't sleeping, right, and I'm probably 42 at this time, I heard in my voice go, John, if I give you all that you're asking for, are you going to take care of my kids? Are you going to have the resourcing, the equipment, the people, and the plan to care for everybody you're asking for? And I went, no. He goes, maybe you need to make some adjustments, right? You're asking for something that you aren't doing the work or the prep to be prepared to receive what you're asking for at the demise of who you're asking for to be in that group, right?
Oh, wow.
So it doesn't matter the size of your group. It matters how well you're ministering to those kids and those families within that group. Saddleback, huge church. Griffin and Fields both came from there. Saddleback's mentality, Kirk Johnston's there. They're going to try to make their large church even smaller by doing smaller gatherings. So if we're doing a lot with a little, God's going to prove much, right? Scripturally, he's going to prove much with the little. He'll give you more because of what you've done with the little.
Yeah.
And so don't be caught up in that world of, well, I don't have enough kids. If you have 2 kids and an adult that can invest in them, you haven't enough, because you have 50, you're playing man defense, right? We start to get a stadium full. You can't manage all those people. So start in that little sense of, don't look at what everybody else is doing. Look what God's doing in you, and doing it in a way that's going to impact those kids to grow the future of whatever God wants to do with them and you. Right.
And that circles back to our beginning conversation about those moments where you realize that you are in a different role when you are managing small groups, because you are in a more of equipping the leaders and they're equipping the students. And so that kind of brings that whole thing all the way back. So
yeah, and Russell, really, I look at two characters in the Bible. Peter, for one, he was the guy, right? He was in Jesus's small group, right?
Mhm.
And people understand, he had 12 in his small group. One of them failed, like actually had him killed, right?
Yeah.
Judas, and then the rest of them kind of disappeared. So if we have some unsuccess in our small groups, so did Jesus, right?
Yeah.
But if, as we're growing our leadership base, or as we're growing our students, what did Jesus do? He told Peter, "You're going to fail." In fact, before the rooster crows, we have chickens. They crow a lot. What did he do afterwards, right? He had a little breakfast for Peter, just him and Peter, and he restored him, right? He
Mhm.
said, "Do you love me? Feed my sheep." That's one denial. "Do you love me? Then feed my sheep." That's two denial, right? He did it 3 times. And I'm Peter going, "Well, I thought I was just going for bacon and eggs here, Jesus, but really I feel like garbage, but you just restored me." So
Mhm.
as we're seeing our leaders fail, that's fine. Own it if it's our responsibility. We didn't equip them, we didn't give them material,
Mhm.
but also help them learn from it and grow from it so that they can feel that restoration that Jesus gave Peter.
Mhm.
Good. All right. Sorry.
Yeah.
Oh man, I'm so excited about
That's
youth
all.
ministry.
That's all right. And I foresee many conversations both in this platform and maybe on some other platforms as well. And there's been so much in here, but I will close it down because Brett's going to wonder when he's editing why it's at 2
We're
hours long.
messing with Brett. Take that,
That's
Brett.
right. That's right. Take that, Brett. So can you tell us how we can find you online with you or your just all your contact stuff, or for To Engage or whatever? If somebody has questions for you, how do we find you?
Sure. So personally, you can all the social medias. If you look up at Jon Batch, JonBatch, I'm on all Twitter, Instagram, all those. And the To Engage really has a website. It's www.toengage, the number 2engage.org. But if you hit social medias, and I'm telling you guys, within reason, I'm willing to meet and have conversations with pretty much anybody willing to have a conversation. I know that you and I have a vast array of knowledge, and it's meant to share, but it's also meant to be asked for. So at Jon Batch is pretty much everything: Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and all those things. That's the best route that everything else branches off.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks again. And just a reminder to everybody, those housekeeping things, social media at Talk Student Men, website, studentministryconversations.org. But I don't want to take up all your time with that. Just come find us, come find John, come talk to me at RGM Music on all the same things as well, because my name is not unique enough and I get confused with the catcher for the Dodgers and the Russell Martin, the catcher who had played for baseball stuff. So I couldn't
Couldn't be bad if they're sending you checks in that.
Right. Well, yeah, but they haven't sent the checks yet. So anyway, thank you all, and we'll see you next week.